Hi, I'm Jack Messer, the Director of Planning for the City of Overland Park. You are tuning in to a video series that has been prepared in advance of the city's upcoming comprehensive planning process in 2022. The city is engaged with speakers to present trends and think about how cities, and particularly a suburban city like Overland Park, might think ahead about its future. We want this information to help motivate you to participate in the planning of your city, this city's future. We have also offered an opportunity for you to react to these thoughts and hope you will provide feedback in the online survey offered at the end of the video. This is our fourth and final Planning the Plan session. The other videos remain available on our website. We hope you find this information useful. This session is titled The Big Impact of Small-Scale Development. Planning and providing for housing is a big part of what we must think about for Overland Park's future. As the planning director, I have often noted that primarily in Overland Park, we are only building large apartment complexes and large single-family homes, whereas in our historical past, there have been a wide range of housing choices developed. The idea that we can provide for a broader range of housing choices should be a component of the city's profile in addition to smaller scale commercial choices. It's a development style that lends itself to smaller businesses and provides a complement to what is already being successfully developed in Overland Park. Today's speaker, Abby Kinney, is an urban designer and planning consultant at Gould Evans Studio for City Design, based in Kansas City, Missouri, and holds a degree in urban planning and design from UMKC. She views her professional experience as a source of constant learning and believes in dedicating her abilities toward the enhancement of quality of life and the empowerment of citizens at the local level. As a Midwest native, she has a particular interest in promoting practices and tools that help small and mid-sized communities become stronger with growth. In her own community, Abby works to advance bottom-up strategies that enhance both private development and the public realm. She facilitates the Kansas City Incremental Development Alliance, hosts the popular Upzoned podcast with Strong Towns organization, and is co-chair of Young Leaders Group with the Kansas City Urban Land Institute. So watch our video, and afterward, please take time to give us feedback on what you learned.
Hello, everyone. My name is Abby Kinney. I'm an urban planner at Gould Evans in Kansas City. And today I'm going to talk about the concept of incremental development as well as missing middle housing. So during the comprehensive planning process, you will hear a lot of rhetoric around growth. But what does growth actually mean? What does it look like? Who implements growth? And what kinds of places does it ultimately create? The comprehensive planning process is a really important opportunity to consider how growth is guided and managed in Overland Park for the next 20 years. So this has huge implications for how the city is able to offer a high quality of life and respond to market pressures, as well as to remain economically healthy. Many of us, when we think about growth, we think of large scale development projects. These are the kinds of projects that we might see on the front page of the local newspaper. We think of new subdivisions, shopping centers, apartment complexes, expanding on the edge of town where existing farmland might exist. We also think of large-scale development projects like large mixed-use apartment complexes or office parks being inserted into existing contexts. These are examples of a city being built in large chunks. And it's much more reflective of this conventional large-scale development model that we may be used to. It's a model that is very relevant to Overland Park and suburban cities across the country and has been relevant for decades. But it is very important to understand that this is not the only kind of growth that occurs in communities, and it's not the only model that will likely occur into the future as aging neighborhoods require reinvestment. When we look at our communities, we may think that they have been built out to a finished state, but the reality is that no neighborhood is ever frozen in time. All neighborhoods age, buildings require reinvestment, and markets change as generational shifts occur. Civilization has never been static, it never will be static, and lack of reinvestment is actually a sign of more serious underlying economic issues that communities really want to avoid. But this doesn't necessarily mean that reinvestment ought to be transformative, like how the first generation of development transformed rural land into full-fledged neighborhoods. In fact, the conventional large-scale development approach is not really well suited to carry out the many incremental reinvestments that all neighborhoods eventually require. Instead, an incremental approach is going to be needed. And this is much more of a decentralized attitude towards real estate investment than may be familiar before. So let's look at some examples of how growth could occur in Overland Park. And in this example, I'll talk about an area that may have a market for 200 new residential units. So the first option is the conventional approach for expanding a community. So building new subdivisions out on the outskirts, or perhaps a new apartment complex out on the outskirts of town, where currently we have natural or agricultural land. This is a very familiar conventional approach for accommodating growth, but it does come with trade-offs. So a new subdivision requires taxpayer-funded streets and other infrastructure. And if the tax dollars generated by the new properties don't exceed the long-term cost of public infrastructure, then this growth is ultimately shrinking the pie by expanding our liabilities over time. Another option would be to find a single developer to concentrate a few sites and build all the units in one place. And so this would result in a large-scale apartment complex as an example. The benefit of this is that it fulfills really the number one rule of city economics, which is that efficient use of land earns more. So this approach is much more affordable for taxpayers because it utilizes existing infrastructure in a more productive way. But it does have some contextual limitations because a big building can be an abrupt change in scale for surrounding neighborhoods. So this isn't going to be applicable in all places in a community. But what both of these examples don't do is build a fully comprehensive range of housing types in really a housing portfolio for Overland Park. They serve a limited market, and they can only be limited by leveraging really large amounts of capital to build things out seemingly to a finished state. An alternative would be what we call an incremental development approach. So this aims to absorb the market, or at least a portion of the market, through a broader variety of different housing types. This not only provides the benefit of neighborhoods thickening up and making new use of existing sites and infrastructure, but it also creates opportunity for small-scale, more entrepreneurial developers to offer an alternative housing option that may not currently be provided through the conventional real estate models. The incremental development approach produces what we often call in the business missing middle housing. So examples of missing middle housing varies and basically includes everything between the large lot single family houses that we may be used to seeing and the large scale apartment complexes or apartment buildings that we see. This middle range of housing lends itself really well to blending into many different contexts. It also helps to create a more comprehensive housing portfolio with a broader set of price points and even ownership opportunities. So diversifying options will help make Overland Park a lifelong community, which allows residents to live throughout the community in many different housing types, depending on what their own lifestyle needs are at different parts of their life. So just to point out a few options that we might think about through this comprehensive planning process. There's one that's called accessory dwelling units, or ADUs for short. This is probably the most popular missing middle housing type these days because there's a relatively low barrier to entry in developing one of these. You don't necessarily need to be a professional developer to convert your garage, a pool house, or a walkout basement into a separate living space. And these are especially popular for people who have college-age kids or elderly relatives, people who want to have their own private space and are independent enough to live alone, but they don't really need the burden of a large house, or they don't want to live in an apartment complex. ADUs also provide a bonus if the homeowner happens to be charging their college-age kid rent to stay in the converted space. So there's a little bit of an economic incentive there. There's also duplexes, or what are sometimes called twin villas. These buildings can be owner occupied or rented and are really well suited for a lot of different people's circumstances. They could also be used as co-housing, where two family members own the building together, but they have their own independent spaces. This is also often a type of housing that takes the form and shape and style of a regular old house. So it blends in really well into areas where you might think it's just single family housing, but you have lots of other types as well blended in. Another type of missing middle housing is called row houses, or sometimes called townhomes. These are basically houses that are attached at the sides, usually in groups of 4 to 8. They can be owned or rented, and parking can be located in the back of the building so that the curb appeal is nice out front. You can also have on-street parking out front, depending on the context. And this is really a type of housing that lends itself to a variety of needs and circumstances for residents. Another type is what we might think of as a starter home, or a small lot, single family detached house, or detached houses that are arranged in a courtyard fashion. This is a kind of housing arrangement that is incredibly efficient in terms of use of land use, and also serves the market for smaller scale single family homes, especially first time home buyers. So the reduced amount of open space helps to reduce lawn maintenance for those that aren't really looking to spend a lot of time on their weekends cutting grass or taking care of a large house. The last type that I will show is probably more limited in applicability in Overland Park, but certainly you could see it in some places. And it's definitely worth considering because we see these popping up all over the place these days, not only across the country, but in some parts of the Kansas City metro now. This is what's called a live-work housing type. It's really ideal for people who are in the trades professions, other makers, like people who are in the arts, business owners who want to have a small office space or a workshop, maybe freelancers, or people who have startups. So this essentially enables you to have both your workspace and your home space in one building to reduce your overall cost of living and make better use of those spaces. So you can't really talk about housing without talking about density. This is something that comes up a lot these days. But I think it's important to kind of break down what it means, what it matters. Put simply, density is an equation that measures the number of units per acre. So if you have 4 homes on 1 acre, that is 4 units per acre. So that seems pretty straightforward, but it is a really abstract way of measuring compatibility because it doesn't tell us how growth will manifest in form, space, design, and most importantly, what kinds of places it's creating. While density as a rule gives us an idea of what kind of infrastructure might be needed, what economic health outcomes should be expected, it doesn't really tell us anything about design. So instilling contextual urban design principles is really critical for reinforcing the physical design characteristics that make our places lovable, the characteristics that really matter. Focusing on design elements like frontage, scale, or even height matters a lot more than the density equation. Because the reality is that you could see every single housing type in this example mixed in and integrated into a full-fledged community. And it would be a great community, but a lot of people wouldn't necessarily be thinking about the dwelling units per acre when they're experiencing a neighborhood that they love. It's a lot more arbitrary when you have a neighborhood that is designed well and you're building buildings that are beautiful and lovable and integrate well into one full-fledged community. So I wanted to pull some examples of where incremental development has already happened in Overland Park. This is an example of a site that was redeveloped into some really nice looking townhomes. You can see how the curb appeal has been emphasized with a front yard and a porch, and the parking is tucked away in the back. This is another example of where the previous condition was a vacant lot, and now you see townhomes that have been built to fill in that space. The townhomes have been designed to draw on the architectural palette and building form of its neighbors and emphasizes curb appeal with street trees and walk-ups. Incremental development doesn't always mean that a building is reconstructed either. It sometimes includes cases where older homes have been saved and reinvested in. So preservation of existing building stock is also incremental development in many cases. And it's not just limited to residential development, but also commercial. So here's an example of where we see a formerly single-family house adjacent to the downtown area has been reused as a small business. And here's another example where we had some missing space or an empty space in the downtown area that has been filled in with new development. And again, when we think about commercial growth, we might immediately think of more large-scale, corporate-focused development projects. And as we think about commercial growth and what it means for Overland Park into the next 20 years, we might think about how to foster more resilient outcomes than the boom and bust approach we are experiencing the consequences of today. All over cities across America, we are seeing the outcomes associated with overbuilding big box retail, especially as individuals and families shop more regularly online and are instead seeking out experiences and shopping centers that emphasize placemaking over the convenience of in and out shopping. And while not all shopping centers are going to be completely reimagined, it's important to consider how we can plan for more incremental approaches to retrofitting underutilized commercial space. One that not only provides a higher financial return on investment to taxpayers and makes better use of existing land, but also offers the space for a broad variety of businesses and contexts that are better connected to surrounding neighborhoods. So we might think about, a traditional town center versus the conventional big box retail model and what that really looks like in terms of placemaking, in terms of local businesses and the value per acre that is produced from not only the businesses, but also the property value. And also how these places ultimately connect with surrounding neighborhoods and what that context looks like. Do we feel safe with our kids walking to these different destinations? So these are all kinds of considerations that we might think about when thinking about how commercial is ultimately built into the future. So currently there are many influences that are causing the real estate industry to skew towards a more large-scale development model. Things like construction costs, lack of sufficient labor, are all tipping the real estate market towards the need to scale up as much as possible in order to make projects more viable. Many of these influences are out of the local community's control, but there are ways to level the playing field. Local communities can be intentional about addressing the hurdles to small-scale development projects so that more entrepreneurs can contribute to how neighborhoods are able to respond to and absorb growth pressure. Modernizing zoning standards, building codes, review processes, all help the development process, and they set expectations for those who are taking a big risk and even pursuing a small investment. So the way cities operate at the staff level is also very critical, since development touches multiple departments from fire to public works, planning. And it's really important to have proactive problem solving, because that's going to make smaller projects more viable when thinking about how to reuse vacant lots or reinvest in existing buildings. Growth in development obviously operates within a really broad ecosystem, and this may not even capture everything that impacts how development operates. It's the city's role to really kind of help support this ecosystem in a way that is reflective of the long-term public interest. So considering what cities can do to help is hugely impactful to the outcomes that we see in the future, and ultimately the places that we create into the future. And not a single development approach or approach to growth is going to dominate the future of Overland Park. A comprehensive planning process is a great opportunity to think about how your place in Overland Park ought to handle growth into the future. Every neighborhood will evolve over time, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we have to think big about what change occurs. We can, in fact, think about kind of all the small investments that produce the things that we love most about our community and how to make more things like that. There's likely a lifetime worth of work to be done to reinvest in very small ways. So each small project is really an opportunity to not only modernize, but build upon everything that Overland Park has to offer. So if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. Like I said, I'm located in Kansas City, just down the road, and I'm happy to answer any questions. So best of luck to Overland Park on your comprehensive planning process, and thank you very much.
For more information about this speaker series, including past sessions, and to keep up with the latest, visit opkansas.org/compplan.